two dark events in Oklahoma's history, one 100 years ago, and the other just a quarter of a century. One is said to be the deadliest and most destructive massacre in our country's history, and the other the worst act of domestic terrorism on American soil. Today, we educate. The story of the Oklahoma City bombing is being taught, and generations around the world are learning this story through artifacts, video, interactives, and technology. But we must never quit remembering. There is a huge effort to tell the story that has not been told for generations about what happened in North Tulsa. But Greenwood is rising. There will be no excuse not to hear eyewitness accounts and learn from the past as this new museum opens on this historic corner. But time does not heal all wounds. These stories are as relevant today as ever. Tonight, we tackle tough issues as we sit down for the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum's Better Conversations and talk about reconciliation, resilience, and public memory. Tonight, we work to find common ground on this sacred ground.
Good evening. I'm Kari Watkins, Executive Director of the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum. Thank you for joining us tonight as we gather with our friends from Tulsa and Oklahoma City for a conversation about reconciliation, resilience, and what exactly is our public memory. I want to welcome Bob Ross, our Chairman of the Memorial Foundation Board of Trustees, Senator Kevin Matthews, the Chair of the 1921 Tulsa Massacre Centennial Commission, Phil Armstrong, Project Director for Greenwood Rising, and Jabee, an Emmy award-winning national hip-hop artist who grew up in Northeast Oklahoma City and still calls Oklahoma City home. A year ago, we started Better Conversations, thanks to a special gift from Bank of America, and tonight we can continue this program in 2021 thanks to a gift from Kyle and Sarah Sweet and their family. We're so grateful in helping make tonight's program possible. Let me explain how tonight will work. We'll have many join us online and on Facebook. You'll have a chance to send us questions in the chat feature. We'll also have guests on the video wall, and they'll ask questions as well. But first, we have asked everyone around the table to spend just a few minutes bringing us up to speed on where we are in teaching and talking about these tough moments in Oklahoma history. We'll spend the first half of the program, a group conversation around this table, and then we'll take your questions from our viewing audience, those on our digital wall and those from watching from home. Again, just type in your question on the chat feature on the platform you're using. If you're posting on social media, please use hashtag Better Conversations. That will automatically go to our social media wall on memorialmuseum.com. I've long admired Senator Kevin Matthews from the work he's done in Tulsa, and he felt like he was the lone voice. His relentless work has drawn an amazing circle of supporters. Senator Matthews, thanks for joining us tonight for Better Conversations.
Well, thank you, Carrie. As Carrie mentioned, I'm Oklahoma State Senator Kevin Matthews, Senate District 11 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which includes the historic Greenwood District, a once thriving black business mecca, also called Black Wall Street. We're so grateful to the leadership of Bob, Carrie, and the staff here at the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, which recognizes the tragedy of the 168 lives lost in the Oklahoma City bombing. We're grateful for them allowing us to share the story of another tragedy that happened in our state that had been all but forgotten and rarely discussed for the past 100 years. The 1921 race riot, now known as the 1921 Race Massacre. In 2015, I started to formalize a way to tell this story in a compelling way. We will discuss how we came to organize a commission that has paved the way to build a world-class history center in Tulsa after the National Museum of African American History and Culture drew more than 5 million visitors to Washington, D.C. its first 2 years of opening. Well, this story was told and was not being told effectively here in our own state. In 2017, Senate Bill 17, which passed unanimously in our state legislature, paved the way for our current administration to support the effort. So thank you for having us this evening.
So glad you're here. Senator Matthews is the visionary who has helped building this important group in Tulsa, and we're working right alongside him as Phil Armstrong, the project director. Phil, this is an important year for you guys. You tell us about where you are today, when you plan to open, and what the 100th anniversary looks like as we begin to come out of COVID in Oklahoma.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm honored tonight to be here and to serve as the project director of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. The Centennial Commission, formed in 2015 by State Senator Kevin Matthews, seeks to educate all United States citizens about Tulsa's historic Greenwood district, the storied Black Wall Street, including the massacre, and its impact on Oklahoma and the nation. Utilizing an experiential, sustainable approach, the Commission will build social ties and unite communities. The Commission's work falls into 6 categories, which are the basis for committees: arts and culture, education, bricks and mortar, economic development, commemoration, and cultural tourism. These interconnected building blocks undergird our ambitious agenda. Each committee set project goals, after which the Commission prioritized projects achievable by 2021. A critical part of the Commission's efforts is the creation of a world-class history facility to showcase Tulsa's historic Greenwood district. The museum-grade exhibition, Greenwood Rising, will tell the story of the original Black Wall Street and reconnect this iconic African-American enclave. It is designed by Local Projects, a New York firm who helped design the 9/11 Museum, and is curated by author and historian Hannibal B. Johnson. The overarching theme for Greenwood Rising, the human spirit, speaks to the dignity of a people who turned trials, tribulations, and tragedy into triumph. Acknowledgement, apology, and atonement are central to racial reconciliation in Tulsa. Through truth-telling, Greenwood Rising honors the icons of Black Wall Street, memorializes the victims of the massacre, and leverages the lessons of the past to inspire positive action in the present and chart a new, positive, inclusive course for the future. Our North Star during this process is a quote by the African-American playwright and author James Baldwin. "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced."
That's inspiring. Thank you, Phil. I'm honored every day to work with Bob Ross, our current Memorial Trustee Chair, and as over my past 25 years, the right leadership has always risen to the top at the right time, and we've just come out of our 25th anniversary, which is a very unusual year, where things looked very different and how we presented them had to look different. But Bob has been an incredible supporter of the memorial for a long time. Bob, tell us what we're working on at the memorial.
Thanks, Carrie, and it's just great to be here. Senator Matthews and Jabee and Phil, just sharing this table with you all is just a real privilege and honor tonight. It's been said often that what happened in April 19th, 1995 was really our darkest hour, but truly our spirit shone brightest, and ordinary people became extraordinary heroes that day, and we literally witnessed mankind at their kindest. That is why in the nearly 26 years since, we have worked to reframe that day and the response into a story and a lesson that we continue sharing with the world, so the tragedy from April 19th is never forgotten. So we learn from it and do our part in standing up to this senseless act of violence as an answer to a difference of opinion or ideology. It must not take a tragedy that brings out the best in mankind. Our memorial and museum has remained steadfast in teaching those lessons, whether inside our museum, through our exhibits, our STEM lab, the many educational programs we have, or even now through our virtual format. Along with our educational programming, we've been listening, sharing, and hopefully inspiring other communities. We feel a deep sense of responsibility in standing up and being a part of conversations that honor each other's perspectives. That is the focus and the purpose of tonight. That is the focus and purpose of Better Conversations, which is our signature program at the Memorial. We are so grateful in coming together with the leaders of the Greenwood Rising Project to share what we have learned about reconciliation and resilience and why public memory is so very important. We are here to listen to the story about the Tulsa race massacre and understand why the Greenwood Rising Project is so critical. At the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum, we believe strongly that it is our duty and responsibility to be a global thought leader on healing, strength, resilience, and growth in the wake of tragedy. If we don't, who will?
That's exactly right. And that's really what we're doing tonight, is trying to meet our visitors and our guests where they are, and how they interpret our stories is so important. I have a couple of teenagers at home, and so I've heard Jabee's music before, but it really was the reporter Steve Lackmeyer who suggested we get in touch this summer as our community was grappling with the racial tensions. And I've learned a lot from Jabee, and I asked him to join us at the table tonight because he knows both of these moments in history and how they changed our home state and how we begin to teach that now to the next generation. Jabee?
Thank you, Ms. Carrie. I remember where I was April 19th, 1995. It's a day that I tell my children about, and I'm sure they'll tell their children about it as well. The parallels between the 1921 Tulsa race massacre and April 19th, 1995 are inescapable. The thread that ties the two together isn't just the fact they happened in Oklahoma. It's the ideals and principles that are centered around hate and destruction. This is why resilience is so important to highlight. People of all races in Oklahoma have had to be resilient to massive tragedy. This should bring us together as a state and not drive us apart.
That's the truth, and we've learned that very well. Let's just start the conversation, and again, thank you guys for joining us tonight. Senator Matthews, let's talk about, start by asking you the relationship between the violence that happened in Tulsa in 1921 and what happened in Oklahoma City in 1995. Is that similar? Do you see it similar to what's happening today in today's world?
Well, yes, Carrie. You know, we have this cancel culture today, and hate has been at an all-time high. We've seen it in the news just this past week. And the fact that just a few of the times that Americans have bombed Americans is right here with the Oklahoma City bombing and in Tulsa with the 1921 race massacre. And so hate caused both of those things to happen, and the resilience of the people in Oklahoma City, and of course the resilience of the people in Tulsa that rebuilt 2 times, are the similarities. And the hate is the thing that we want to change.
That's true. Bob, what do you think?
Well, you know, times change, obviously, and gosh, it's been 100 years. But no matter, violence cannot happen. It does not work. And that's really, you know, the lessons learned here. America is such a wonderful and beautiful country. Protesting is allowed, peaceful protesting, but when it turns violent, it's not okay. And I think that's, for me, a big takeaway. You know, one thing we work on, really try to work on at the memorial, is putting a face to terrorism, both the perpetrator and the victim. And we have to make sure that we never dehumanize anyone. As we have seen, violence always starts with this dehumanization, and dehumanization starts with our words, and words matter. We have to hold each other accountable. You know, violence, hate crime, terrorism, it's never okay. And we have to teach people there's an alternative way, you know, to get your message across.
Well, as we look at domestic terrorism, by definition of the United States Code, is involving acts of danger to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States, or of any state for that matter, and appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civil population, influence a policy of the government, or mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occurs primarily within the jurisdiction of the United States. So both Oklahoma City and Tulsa historically have shown us that these victims were dehumanized, and then they became targets. It's an important part of both of our stories, I think. Phil, as you work to keep this story alive in public memory, talk about the pressure you're hearing and seeing in our country as we're still battling too much racism.
Carrie, you know, going off of what Bob had just mentioned, you know, we're not where we used to be, and things have changed over 100 years. But one thing that is constant is that history tends to repeat itself. And some of the same rhetoric and the racial animosity that went unchecked 100 years ago, that just was allowed to grow, and false narratives adding to that, what it builds up over time. And when communities remain divided and they just talk at each other and not to each other. Same thing that happened in 1995, a building up of rhetoric. And so here we are in 2021. And in the past few years, I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock if you can't say that, you know, we're getting to a dangerous place in our country again. And we've got to get to a point where, hey, I can find a place where I can sit and have discussions with people that maybe I don't know much about, or maybe I disagree with ideologically, but I can sit down and let's talk about that human element that we all share. And that's, you know, with what we're doing here tonight, and just having conversation with what Greenwood Rising will do. We'll have a chamber called the Journey to Reconciliation, a space where people can sit, a safe space to have conversations, to be able to say, give me a second, give me a moment to look through life through your eyes. Help me to understand why you think the way you think, why you feel the way you feel. Help me to break down these biases that I have been taught, that have been placed in me by society, maybe by some of my own family members, and help me to understand what is it about us that we can have commonality and start on this journey to reconciliation. That's what our country needs, that's what our state needs, that's what our city needs, and the work is never done. The journey to reconciliation is never, hey, we've arrived. It's a continual journey, and that's what we need to continue right what we're doing now.
Well, not to add to your stress, but you're less than 90 days or so from opening. How does this pressure of the world help or hurt you as you try to get this message across?
Honestly, even with all the pressure, and hey, I can take a page out of your book, you know, when you were opening this center and what you had to face. It's actually energizing to see how many groups literally are coalescing around this. Young and old, rich and poor, black and white, Republican and Democrat. People are recognizing this is a story that we have got to make sure the next generation of people do not get to college and say, I've never heard this story before, and how come nobody ever taught me about this? Not just the tragedy of 1921, but the vibrancy of what was these dynamic black communities in these historic black towns in Greenwood. To get to a point where we can do that and to see people say, I want to be a part of that. We've been divided in the past, but this is something we can unite over. It's amazing to see how that's happening.
Absolutely, that's great to hear. Jabee, what do you see as the connection between hate crimes and domestic terrorism in the world today?
You know, I think the biggest connection is probably, you know, violence. You know, whenever you dehumanize someone, it's so easy to be violent towards them. And, you know, I think that, you know, violence isn't partisan. Violence isn't anything. You know, it's that we try to attach it to sometimes, and you know, but it is connected to, like you said, you know, hate. It is connected to dehumanizing people, and if you look at 1995, you know, for somebody to be okay with bombing, you know, a building full of people, there has to be a point to where they don't value those people's lives. You know, you look at 1921 for bombs to be dropped on a community of people, you know, that they look at those people they don't value, and we know that in 1921, black people's lives weren't valuable. So I just think that, you know, for me, that's probably the connection I see, and I think is probably the thing that needs to be dismantled the most is probably just that idea that, you know, we can place value on people's lives based on, you know, who they are, how we feel about them, you know.
How do you think the people of our state show resiliency in teaching these stories?
I think we show resiliency to continue to share the stories. You know, it's 25 years, and you know, the Oklahoma City bombing is still something that is a touchy subject for all of us. You know, we're at 100 years for, 1921. And, you know, for a lot of us, especially black people, the idea of, you know, what happened is still a touchy subject. And oftentimes people say, you know, why do we keep bringing these things up? Why do we keep talking about it? We keep talking about it and bringing it up because it continues to happen. So, you know, I think that part of being resilience is being part of having resilience is being able to have that conversation, you know, and not sweep it under the rug because it's difficult to talk about it because, you know, if you talk about it, then, you know, you might feel some sort of, you know, responsibility or feel guilty or, you know, whatever. I think that, you know, to talk about it and address it and try to come to terms with, you know, where we went wrong. And I'm saying we, you know, where we went wrong, you know, how we created these things and try to fix it and turn it around. And, you know, I think the foundation of any of that is just, it has to be love because, you know, I know for me, I've done a lot of things, but anytime I've loved somebody, it's never not worked. So
That's great.
Phil or Senator, you all are going to see in Tulsa when you dedicate this beautiful center in June, people are going to come from all over the world, and they're going to keep coming. And you have a shared experience. Some communities where tragedy does strike, where violence strikes, they'll come and they'll say, how do we respond as a community? We need your help and we need your support. Why do we keep having these shared experiences? And I want to list off some of the communities that have come to Oklahoma City, and ones that we will probably help in the future. But Boulder was very recent, but Atlanta, El Paso, Charleston, Orlando, Las Vegas, New York, Washington, D.C., the list goes on. What can we do to continue teaching the next generation that violence is not the answer, there's a different path? And what can we do as institutions?
Well, really, and as it's as simple as what we're doing here, is having the conversation, be willing, as in the James Baldwin quote, let's face this together. What's difficult is that you have to face that there's something that's the good and bad and the ugly of the situation. Right. But you can't really have healing until you face that something went wrong and something was bad. And facing it, facing that these things are going to continue to happen until we face and look at why do we continue to keep coming around to this place of violence and misunderstandings that go unchecked, and then when something of a horrific nature happen, we come back to, well, how could this happen? It's because we continue talking, again, as I said before, talking at each other, not talking with each other. I've said many times as I talk about Greenwood Rising and talk about all the work that we plan to do and hope to do, is that, and Senator Matthews and those of his colleagues, as they try to change laws and make policies and make policy decisions, even from the highest level of the country, even to here, until you can change as many laws and policies as you want to. But I truly believe until you change the way someone thinks about a group of people, until you change the way someone feels in their heart about someone they may not understand or may not have the different background, when you start to change the way someone thinks and feels about you, you get that humanistic experience. It's so hard. It's much harder to dehumanize someone when I understand you. I may not have lived your experience, but I can understand why and understand where you came from, and helps me to respect at least and honor that. And until we get to that point on a wide level, I think that what we do here in Oklahoma will spread to other communities. People will, ground zero for race relations in this country starts here in Oklahoma in Greenwood. And when you start there and we start to get it right and we start on that journey and we start bringing people together to the table, other communities are going to come here and say, you know what they're doing in Oklahoma, what they did in Greenwood, we need to do that here. And so this can really be a model for the country and the nation to say, we want to do that and bring what they did there to the rest of the country.
that's good.
That's great.
When we talk about reconciliation, and as we look at these two events in history, knowing we have struggled for decades with violence, and today we're confronting the very worst of our state's history, How do we move past that, Senator Matthews?
Well, Carrie, first we do what Phil talked about, is we do what's uncomfortable, is have those courageous conversations and then courageous actions that go along with it. This cancel culture that we're looking at politically across the country, people are doing what's popular in their own groups, even when they know better. And so we have to do what many people on this board that we see have supported this effort. Even though it may not be the popular thing, it's the right thing. And we have to be courageous enough to do the right thing against what's popular and get rid of that cancel culture.
Jabee, you're kind of the bridge here, the bridge of the older generation and the younger generation. You speak to these younger kids every day through your music. How do we reach the next generation?
I think probably the best way to reach the next generation is just to educate them and not hide the truth from them. Part of the reason we're even having this conversation today is because the truth was hid for so long about Tulsa, and you have generations and generations of people who grew up not knowing. And then if you think about where we are today. We've gotten to the point where we stopped calling it the race a riot and called it what it was, a massacre. And so when I think about, the next generation, I think about, just a lot of the younger people that I see, they are, they don't really see, they see the world in bright colors, and they see, they see it different. And I think that it's good in a lot of ways because they're at a point to where we can look at them and tell them the truth about these things, and it not be like it was hid before. Because whenever you tell them and it's hidden, it's like, why can't you tell me this before? But if now we get to tell them these stories and this truth, they feel like they aren't being lied to. And I think for the other side of the bridge, for older generations, it's important that we be willing to not burn that bridge, but be willing to be open and honest about where we were as a country, and the only way to get to where we want to be is to be open and honest about where we were as a country and say, yes, this did happen in 1921 in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for these reasons, and I'm telling you this story because we don't want it to happen again.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Mm-hmm. Well, as we go to the wall, or online chat, let's remember our grounding virtues of better conversations. As we continue to ask tough questions tonight, remember to use words that matter: humility, generous listening, hospitality, patience, and adventurous civility. Civility in our world where so much is changing, and it's about creating new possibilities for moving forward while being different and maybe even continuing to hold profound different opinions, but we can still agree to disagree. I mean, that's one of the things we think is important, is we have these conversations. A lesson I learned in my earliest days of the memorial, when we were trying to decide if we could close 5th Street, and a young man, we'd presented what we thought was a very powerful presentation to the city council, and a young man stood up who lived in Regency Towers and talked about why the street should remain open. And I remember for the first time, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, at age 29, I realized that his opinion mattered to him as much as mine did to me. Neither one of us were right or wrong, we just had different opinions. And today that young man is now a little older, and he comes to every anniversary ceremony. He's there. He still had profound impact on where we are today. And I think that's where we are in better conversations, is even if we don't agree on something, we can still respect that we're coming to it from different perspectives. So let's just start with the wall and go to a few questions. If somebody has a question, you can on the social media wall.
They can unmute.
Yeah, unmute and raise your hand, and we'll call on you. And we're getting some calls, some questions online, and we'll ask those as well. Anybody want to go first?
I think Mike Turpin is former chairman of the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum, on our executive committee.
Mike, you have a question?
I do. Thank you. I grew up in North Tulsa. I graduated from McLean High School. So with the gentleman on the panel, I'm claiming some bona fides, if you will. Okay, thank you. Thank you for laughing. I'm trying to be funny a little bit. Now let me get very serious. So I was grateful as a prominent Democrat, as a progressive Democrat, I was grateful early on to see a very conservative Republican like James Langford do a lot of good work in North Tulsa where I grew up. Marissa Treat is on his staff. They were doing some really good work in North Tulsa where I grew up. And it really kind of touched my heart that a conservative Republican senator would even care about North Tulsa. I found that uplifting. I then saw what he said January 6th and related. I saw what each of you said, and I was moved, Phil, by the letter that you wrote. And I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding what happened, but you just said something that moved me when you talked about your museum and Black Wall Street perhaps becoming ground zero for racial reconciliation for this city, for this state, for this country. Talk about how you decided to kind of make peace. I know not everybody has, but I saw what you said, Phil. How did you decide to make peace, you and the senator, with Senator James Langford after some of the things that he said? I think it's a good lesson in reconciliation and what we're talking about as a premise for Greenwood Rising.
That is hard-hitting, Mike Turpin. Thank you. Give a little bit of background on the issue. We've got people zooming in from all over the country that may not know exactly the issue. Phil.
So the community and the work that the commission has done has been, and I've said it many times, and first of all, thank you for the question and thanks for acknowledging that. And yes, it has been very controversial. It has had its moments of the commission having to evaluate, and through Senator Matthews' leadership, this began with him reaching out to those who may vote differently, who may look at political issues differently, but looked at the fact that we needed all Oklahomans to rally around this history and to look at the fact that racial reconciliation and a journey to reconciliation is a difficult one. But early on, and Senator Matthews, I'm sure he'll chime in, and I'll be brief. Early on, I saw Senator Langford show, even when we had the very terrible shooting of Terrence Crutcher, Senator Langford, long before the commission started, actually came to North Tulsa, and an area that you may be aware of, Mr. Turpin, 46th Street, North Tulsa, and actually sat with community members and listened to, and actually sat there and listened to the pain, to the anguish of what Black citizens of Tulsa felt in the days after that shooting. That was the first moment that I saw someone say, you know, in spite of my political career, in spite of the being a conservative Republican, these are fellow Oklahomans that I need to sit and listen to. And I never forgot that. That stuck with me. After the incidents of and the conversations and what took place on January 6th and the statements that Senator Langford did with the other senators, it became a very divisive moment. And our commission, I can't thank enough the leadership of Senator Matthews and our commission saying, you know what, this is a moment where we have to test who we are. Are we really about reconciliation? Even when there are situations we may not agree on, how are we ever supposed to stand and say we believe in racial reconciliation if we only want to sit with those who think the way I think or are going to say what I say? It's going to take times and moments where we actually listen to those and those listen to us. And we had a couple of meetings and we said, you know, the best way to use this is to use this as an example of moving forward. And so, yes, it's difficult when you have those moments, but they're real, and we embraced it, even with our commissioners that said, you know, I don't like what you said. And we did. I don't like what you did. But what are we about? We're about building this history. We're not a political organization. We're about bringing everyone to the table, and even around difficult subjects so that we can find ways to move forward. Senator Matthews may have a lot more to add to that.
My answer is not as diplomatic as my good-looking friend, I was very upset with my good friend, Senator Langford. I called him, talked to him on the phone, told him how egregious this action would be against black people. It would be perceived as against black people, particularly because we had the first African-American woman to become vice president. I'm the chair of the Oklahoma Senate Democrats, and he's a senator on the other side of the aisle. And as we talked, he said, he disagreed with me. I told him it was going to be hostile and that I was going to be the first one to speak against him, and I did. But at the end of the day, where I ended up was we had the discussions, those courageous and tough conversations with our community, and had discussions about what they thought. We let them talk to him directly. We had those courageous conversations, and there are people still unhappy, and I'm still unhappy that he did it. But I also have not forgotten about the risk that he's taken for helping us to create the curriculum to tell this story, for him having me in Washington, D.C. to go to the National African American Museum of History and Culture. That still does not keep me from being upset about his action. But when I was a firefighter before, and I had many people that some people would call racist. And when I came into the legislature, I first went to build relationship with the people I disagree with most. And if we can't do that, we can't get past the cancel culture and the bombing of people that we don't like, et cetera. And so we continue to move forward, but we try to make this not political, but about reconciliation and moving forward, even with those we disagree with, as adamantly as we disagreed on that day.
Thank you, guys. That's something we need to get out there and talk about, and I appreciate you guys candidly talking about that. Let's talk about something that brings us all together, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Christine Burney's on the wall, and the Thunder's been incredibly supportive of both what you guys are doing and what we're doing. And Christine, why don't you ask us some questions tonight?
Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for having all of us here and for hosting this. It's just such a pleasure and an honor to be a part of it, listening to it, and also to have just a little bit through the Thunder to do with these two amazing organizations. As I'm sitting here and listening to you all and thinking about things to come, things that have happened, one of the things that's really exciting to me is that we're going to have these two amazing institutions in two amazing cities, Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And I'm just wondering if you all, we can look a little bit into the future and what sorts of collaborations can we anticipate between these two fantastic museums? One that is in the midst of being built, and one that's been here for a while. That's just really exciting to me. I'd love to hear anything that you're even thinking about considering along those lines.
Well, I'll start. I would say tonight's the first of many good conversations. I think really we do have to sit down and begin to understand what we are as Oklahomans first, and how we're different but yet so much alike. And I think what we saw in 1995 is there was no turnpike. It was we were all Oklahomans, and sometimes we get in this competition, Oklahoma City versus Tulsa, or Tulsa versus Oklahoma City. And really, what's best for Oklahoma is that we're both great, and that we have two organizations, two institutions that will bring people here for cultural tourism, understand what our state's been through, what people have been through. And as Bob said, people use Oklahoma City now as a blueprint for how to heal. We are the city on the hill of how we've gotten through this, and Tulsa will be that very shortly. And so I think that's something that we'll put something, I hope we can put something together about how we came together in these times. And remember that meeting that Huda brought with the Kaiser Foundation and brought you guys to Oklahoma City. We brought some city leaders together, and that was the very first of our relationship. And to be with you guys on the day you broke ground was, for me personally, very moving to see Tulsa moving forward. I grew up 17 miles from there and didn't know this story until I was a college graduate, something I'm not proud of. But I think Christine, we've got to make sure that both of these stories are told in American history books, not just in Oklahoma, but around the world. And the people understand these two stories as moments that changed American history.
Well, I think that we all have something in common. You grew up 17 miles from there. I worked on the fire department, and I was on the fire department when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, and our firefighters dropped everything and came here. One of the things we've talked about over dinner this evening is the Oklahoma standard, and the fact that with all the differences that we've had and these horrific events, when it comes to the human commonality, we drop everything and come together. And that's what we're going to try to portray is the Oklahoma standard. And that's part of what we're starting tonight.
That's good.
Am really excited by the fact that even when we started beginning this, we were talking earlier, Carrie, you were one of the first, of the history centers and museums here. You invited us to come here to Oklahoma City, and Huda, who's actually on the call, to have the mayor of Oklahoma City and key leaders of the community to tell the story, to hear what we're doing, and to say, this happened to Greenwood, this happened in Tulsa, but overall it happened to the state of Oklahoma. So I see a future, Christine, where Oklahoma, people come here to learn the history, come to Tulsa, drive to Oklahoma City, and even learn about the historic black towns in between, and even with the Clara Looper Center that Oklahoma City is building. Oklahoma can be a place where people come and get this wonderful, vibrant history and see what happens when a state, not just a city, but when a state comes together and the impact that it can make for the nation. That's what I see. I really see that in the very near future.
Bob, you want to add anything?
Which is real exciting. And our good friend Ken Levitt is on the Zoom board. And so, Christine, that makes, when you were asking that question, I thought, Ken, one of our very first conversations was how do we bring Tulsa, Oklahoma City together? And what we're talking about here, it just made me think of that. And I looked at your face on Zoom there. But just a little bit of perspective from you. Obviously, you guys are on the ground floor there in Tulsa supporting this effort. Honestly, we felt, and Carrie, I remember our conversation, Carrie, where you said, gosh, we actually as a memorial and museum feel bad we didn't come to your help before this, that we've helped all these other communities. But here we are now together. What if, Ken, we could bring the cities together, the state together, the region, the South, maybe the whole country. I mean, it could be done right here in Oklahoma. But Ken, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And good to see you.
Good to see everybody here. A lot of friends on this call, and such a proud partner of the National Memorial Museum and its brilliant work and leadership, Carrie. I think just like the museum in Oklahoma City has stood for not just memorializing a terrible crime one day, but being a bulwark for democracy and standing against domestic hate and domestic terrorism, which remains a relevant fight to be waged, even today. I think this museum will also have significant national importance and relevance, not just for marking the horrible crime of 1921, but asking very powerful questions that remain alive today. Wealth disparities between black communities and white communities. This was a thriving economic area that was destroyed. It was destroyed really later again after it rose through bad policy, economic urban renewal, and building a highway right through the area and displacing residences. So the issue of racism, economic policy has been relevant throughout our country's history, and those questions will be posed by this center, by this work. And lastly, it's going to pose questions about justice. Justice not just delayed, but justice still denied. I mean, I think about, and this is prompting some thoughts about Oklahoma City, and the heinous crime that was committed, but it was followed by a trial and the meting out of some measure of justice. You know, in Tulsa and in so many of these kinds of situations over the course of our history, there was no justice. There's never been any justice. There were never insurance claims paid. There was never a trial. There was never monetary damages. And so we're also dealing with that trauma. And that very powerful question about where, from whence does justice come 100 years? So I think these are important questions that are being asked in both communities in the spirit of real sincerity. So this is a great event, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of it.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. Great seeing
Brad, with big brothers and big sisters, someone who deals with all types of kids, all different ages and races. Brad, do you have a question?
Yes. First, I want to say thank you to the work that the Oklahoma City National Memorial does for our city, and that Tulsa, what we're going to be doing together. And to go back to Phil's point, I traveled the country for 2.5 years, learning about our country's history, and it's a privilege that I was able to do in my lifetime. We got to go to Birmingham, Alabama, to talk about the 16th Street bombing, to the Freedom Riders Memorial, to Selma, to Montgomery, and so many more. So these types of things really do bring our communities together. And one of the main driving factors that brought me to Oklahoma City in the first place was the National Memorial, because I saw how it brought people together. And through Better Conversations was my first introduction into meeting people within the community, which has actually opened it up to so much more. So I really wanted to start off by commending the work that's being done and that will be done and that we'll continue to do together. Really, what are some ways that you see that we can activate our community to help all of our citizens, especially our Black citizens here in Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Oklahoma in general, but because we're an echoing point for across the country in my eyes.
Well, Jabee and I have been talking about this a lot. You want to take that?
Yeah, I think community itself in Oklahoma, or at least Oklahoma City, we try to stay connected and lift each other up as much as we can. I think that that's probably the easiest way to help, is just continue to lift each other up. But I think, like, for instance, with what this museum is doing for the museum in Tulsa is another way. And what I mean is, if you see somebody or you see a family or a person or a group and you have leverage or resources, reach out to them and help them in those ways, or if that you've done it before, like they've done it before, they've done a museum before, you can reach out and say, how can I help you? I've been down this road before. Those are ways, to kind of just, help the community on a whole. And I think that just understanding the community itself and the community you live in is probably the first thing too. But, I'm sure whenever you guys started putting this museum in the community, one of the first things you asked yourself was, we want to make sure that, this is a place that the community will want to go to, that they can afford to go to, that, whenever they come inside, not only do they see people that don't look like them, there's people who look like them as well. There are so many ways to do things and just keep the community in mind, especially the community that you're working in. If you're working in, a Black community, oftentimes, I say this all the time, is that especially for Black people, we've always been told, how we should live, how we should, work, where we should work, how we should raise our children. I think whenever you go into a community and you want to help them, it's not, is not to tell them, but also ask them, and listen to that community. So I would just, I would say start there. Community is so important, and it's important that we give back. A lot of times we're people who take and take and take, and not like I'm taking things, but we often are given things, so we take those things. We need people who give as well. So
Jabee will never tell you this, but he gives every week, a couple days a week, teaching young kids music in the Boys and Girls Club. Oh, nice. In both Oklahoma City, south side and north side of Oklahoma City. And I think no matter what community you're in, that's a great example of figuring out a way you can give back.
Carrie, can I chime
Yes,
in?
please do.
Listening to JB, and I was sitting there and just thinking, you know, here I am. I've been in Oklahoma 24 years, and Tulsa, and 22 of those 24 years I've lived in North Tulsa. And what he represents, and listening to him now, the older generation, the people I grew up with, and even now, you know, they will say things like, "I stand on the shoulders of those who came before me," and that's what I sense is that, you know, acknowledging this history is acknowledging those who paved the way for us to be where we are now. When I look on the board and you see, you know, former state senator Judy Easton McIntyre, you know, she fought a lot of battles in order for Senator Matthews to be able to, you know, a trailblazer, you know, and she took hits, but she, you know, she cleared a path. Senator Maxine Horner, who, you know, the Tulsa community citywide is still mourning the death, her loss, and what a trailblazer she was. When I served on the Greenwood Cultural Center board, and knowing what they did to clear a path, and Representative Don Ross. So we are here because someone did some work before we got here. Not only with Greenwood rising tide lifts all ships, but what we do there will bring attention to what's going on at Greenwood Cultural Center, what's going on and has been going on with the John Hope Franklin Center and the John Hope Franklin Park. We all work together, and even with, I know Reverend Turner was on the call earlier, even with what's going on at Vernon AME Church, the histories tie to each other, not isolated, you know, silos. The history of Tulsa, the history of Oklahoma City, someone paved the way for us to do what we're doing now, and we're paving the way for the next generation to come in and continue that torch.
Come together, yep. Well, on the wall is interim president of Colorado College, our friend Mike Edmonds. He's a great educator. Mike, talk to us about teaching this next generation.
I'm just so thankful to be here. And Carrie knows this. She and I met randomly at a dinner in Oklahoma City, and she discovered that I actually, in my classes, teach the bombing. The importance, and Senator Matthews just said this, the cancel culture is having a lot of negative impact. I think these opportunities give us a chance to talk about tragedy, which then connects it with hope. So I would love to hear from the panelists, and I'm a living testimony that what happens in Oklahoma gets taught throughout the country. As Carrie would tell you, we hadn't even met, and I could tell her how I teach the bombing in my curriculum and why I teach it. I just would love to know from the panelists, what are some of the lessons that you hope educators can take from your efforts and from the museums, and how do we translate them and articulate the importance in such a way that our youth get it and understand it?
I'd just like to say that Dr. Carlos Hill has started a Teachers Institute. We're going into our 4th year. He's done a great job, and this year was virtual. I'll just simply say that one of the things we talk about in one of the small curriculums is that they took 6th graders, young elementary school kids, and built a town over a whole week. And on that Friday when they went home, they came back and it was burned down off the table, and asked them how they felt. That is a simple way to see that when people work hard to build something and it's gone, it makes an impact.
That's good. That's good.
It's pretty powerful. Bob?
Well, simply visiting our Memorial Year Center, getting students, every one of them in Oklahoma, through the museums, through the learning centers, That has got to happen. And I know it's been a big goal of ours at the Memorial Museum. Mike Turpin championed that, and OG&E actually helped pay for that, among others. But getting people in. And then once they're in, like we were talking about at dinner beforehand, it's not all about a tragedy or a massacre. That is a piece of it. But then there's the next phase. It's, okay, what are we going to do in the future? Resilience, Mike Edmonds, your hope. How do we build, a better community, a better group of citizens? And to me, that's what it's all about.
That's good.
Well, you're talking about standing on the shoulders of giants. One of our giants is Dr. Gloria Griffin, the retired superintendent of Millwood Schools, who really helped us, literally from the very first day, start our education program. Dr. Griffin, do you have a question?
I do have a question. It's somewhat sensitive, but Ken brought it up about justice and the lack of justice for the Greenwood community. Just recently, there was in Evanston, Illinois, there was the nation's first reparation program. And I just want to know, is there any connection between reconciliation and reparation?
Well, I'll answer that. First, I've had this conversation with one of the people that are on our board this evening, and I personally believe that reparations is important. And what we're doing in Tulsa is some portion of reparations. We had the Oklahoma City Thunder basketball team gave $250,000, and they're starting a
Thunder Fellows.
A Thunder's Fellows program that teaches African American kids in Tulsa the analytics of basketball, not just playing basketball. We're working with the Tulsa Chamber to start a program with 30 African American kids will be mentored by corporations all the way through college. These are forms of reparations. I believe that there are several ways to have it. This is one of them, and there are others, and as we just saw, and I think that I was having a conversation earlier, that took 5 to 6 years to get there, and it starts with a foundational discussion of how to do it effectively, and I think that needs to happen, but what we're doing now is telling the story, which is one portion of it, and other forms of reparations, although that probably needs to happen, and I support it. This is one form of reparations that we're doing now.
Well, education is a form, but I think we've seen this week Chicago suburbs are doing some, I talked about that a little earlier. Someone asked about online about what the Oklahoma City bombing victims got. They did not receive any kind of payout like you saw after 9/11 because that was a different issue. But what did happen in Oklahoma City was there was a chance to educate your children if you lost a parent in the bombing, and that was completely separate than building the memorial. And that was one of the things I talked about. Building the memorial and operating the memorial is separate than paying the victims. The victims all in Oklahoma City got benefits from their agencies or where they were, but there was never a payout for the victims. That was one of the questions. I just wanted to clear that up. And that is much different than what you saw after 9/11. And Tulsa, you guys are still working through that and figuring that out.
Correct.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Gloria?
Yes, it does. And in Evanston, they started with, I believe, housing grants for those persons that were involved. But we must do everything we can to break out of our silos and come together and understand that we are one. So I appreciate what the comments that have been made tonight, and I certainly look forward to coming to Tulsa, Greenwood, Rise, and Opus.
One of the questions, it's a great question, how do you memorialize the legacy of survivors that are still living? And I think Dennis Purefoy, is he still on our call? Dennis is a survivor. Dennis, you want to answer? You want to tune in on that? Because Dennis sits on our conscience committee, and he's a survivor of the Oklahoma City bombing. Let's see what he has to say.
Yeah, in the memorial, the survivors and the victims were memorialized separately. That was one thing that was clear from the start. And I think at the memorial it worked out in a very appropriate way. I'm not sure how that would apply to the Tulsa Race Massacre Museum, Greenwood Rising. So I'm really not sure what I could add to that. In the memorial, of course, the survivors are recognized separately from those who lost their lives, but both are recognized, and I think both appropriately. The emphasis is on those who lost their lives, but there is also a recognition for survivors. And I know that for Tulsa, I think the last survivors are no longer with us. If I remember right, there were a few, but certainly there are still children of survivors who are alive, and I think it would be great for their stories to be incorporated in Greenwood Rising of what their parents told them. And I think that would be a great part of the Greenwood Rising Museum.
Phil, you want to talk about that?
Yes, excellent comments there. One of the many features, and I could spend an hour just explaining some of the incredible exhibits that people will see, but one of the main features of Greenwood Rising will be an actual experiential moment where you'll actually walk through what it must have been like experiencing that horrific day. And some of the audio that you'll hear are the actual recordings, the vocal recording, the voice recordings from the Eddie Faye Gates collection. For those that don't know, Eddie Faye Gates was one of the pioneers that before many of these survivors, while they were still alive and living in the mid-90s, actually recorded them telling their story, what they remembered when they were teenagers, when they were young adults, when this took place. And so we'll have those and have rights to actually have those in that so people can hear from the actual people who went through that. There's going to be many tributes and many stories told of those citizens. But also want to explain Greenwood Rising's role in juxtaposition with the other historical memorials that are there. At Greenwood Cultural Center, there's a memorial there, the 1921 Race Riot Memorial, that stands there as a representation of all the financial destruction and damage that took place. And it lists out all the businesses, it lists out their financial claims that they made that were not honored, and that memorial's there. There's another memorial, the John Hope Franklin Park. That beautiful statue in the middle of the park actually was the dedicated to those who lost their lives and those that destroyed. So when we started this project, one of the things that Senator Matthews and the commission heard over and over again from the community was, we know that the massacre is the event, but don't just focus on the massacre. You know, we have these memorials that are there, but we don't have a place that tells the story, which Senator Matthews came back from D.C. and he said, this is right. The community wants what we need, and that is a place to tell the story and tell these survivors. And by the way, we do know of Mother, she's affectionately called Mother Randall, and she's what we know is the last known living survivor in Tulsa, and I think there may be another. But yes, we unfortunately, you know, we're at that point where I think she's 106 years old.
Oh, wow.
But we are dedicating much of this work to their lives.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Jabee, this may be a question for you. Will reconciliation be an illusion that parallels with the illusion of freedom that Black people have in this society?
Whoa. Wow. Whoa.
Say that again.
Whoa.
Will reconciliation be an illusion that parallels with the illusion of freedom that Black people have in this society?
I think that you know, the illusion comes when we don't do what we say we're gonna do. The illusion comes whenever we're dishonest. The illusion comes whenever we hide things. You know, for instance, it's an illusion. You know, I grew up in Oklahoma public schools, and you know, our Oklahoma history book was about that thick, and if we talked about the race massacre, I would remember it. You know what I mean?
Right.
We wasn't in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think the illusion comes whenever we say all these things, and we look, down the road and nothing has changed. We look down the road and nothing is different. For instance, Senator Langford. It can be an illusion for some to see on one side, he's showing up and listening and saying these things and being part of the conversation, and then on the other side, he's saying something that goes against what this community feels is right. And a lot of times, because people like us are in that community every single day. We live and die there. So, the things that, we would say, we would say anyways, but because someone is kind of bouncing around in these different communities, when they're in this setting, they aren't thinking about this community, right? So the illusion comes for us whenever we're in that first meeting, and we feel like, this is someone who is listening, and then whenever they're on TV or on the other side of the aisle, we realize like, well, we feel like, we've either been betrayed or lied to, or did they just forget, or what, So I think that, we need to be, we need to hold people accountable. I think that we need to, like he did on the phone call, hold people accountable, and then, just make sure that we continue to be open and honest about, the history, not just, the history in Oklahoma, but the history in our country, because, we think about what happened in Oklahoma City. Timothy McVeigh bombed that building because he didn't like what it stood for. Good. These people bombed this community because they didn't like what it stood for. And if we don't tell that story, then it's not real. If we aren't honest about what really happened, it's not real. It'll just feel like we're trying to cover things up, and that can seem like a disillusion. Yes, ma'am.
That's good.
Very good point. On the wall is our good friend John Kendi, who's chairing the Claire Looper Memorial downtown Oklahoma City, and John's got a great perspective. John, you have a question?
Well, I love listening to Jabee, and one of the first things he said on this call kind of developed one of the themes of this call, which I think was work on the present, work on the now, so it won't be so hard to look at the pain of the past. And that was a theme that I got from the first thing you said, Jabee. And I think it's important to use history in analysis and planning the way forward. And those are, that applies to Tulsa and to Oklahoma City. And I've been inspired by this call, and I appreciate this call a lot. There's nothing more intimate than conversation. Yeah. And I think better conversations are good for everyone in every community. So I just want to thank everybody that's participating in this.
That's good.
I want to say something to what Bob brought up earlier about every child being able to go through this. What I'm pushing for this session is funding to go through the Oklahoma History Center to allow people on the western side of the state to get grants through the Oklahoma History Center to come to Tulsa to Greenwood Rising, and those on the eastern side of the state to come to the Claire Looper Civil Rights Center, so that all children have the opportunity to learn about this black history and then have that truth told to them. Because as you said, Jabee, when you don't get told early and you get told late, you wonder, were you lied to early or are you being lied to now?
Yeah.
Well, make sure they spend all day here and spend the afternoon.
Yeah, we do need to have the Memorial Museum.
Okay.
Hey, Daryl Davis is online, and
Yellow Bus
Daryl wants to
Brigade.
talk about what we do after tonight's call. What do we do today or tomorrow or the next day? Daryl?
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, tonight I see a lot of people on here that we're already energized. And so how are we going to keep this momentum going? What does the panel want us to do for the future? Because I've been a part of a lot of things, and we get our momentum going, and then it sort of starts to die. So the challenge question to the panel and to everyone else, what do we need to do next to keep this going?
Great question. Bob, you want to start? We'll just go around the table.
Yeah, I mean, we keep it up, and at the Memorial Museum, we've got these better conversations planned every Tuesday night at 7 to 8. You can zoom in, but we've got to push ourselves to bring our friends, our family, people we don't know, to the table, because it doesn't work if it's just always the same people talking. The tent's got to be big, the umbrella really wide open.
I would just say to our director to continue the communication with you as the director here, because this was not a natural connection for people in my community to pay attention to this, and now we see the similarities because we're here. And I would just challenge Phil as he moves forward to continue to have this relationship, because really I'm learning tonight that same type of hate is what we can work on when we have this connection. And I would say that the leadership make it a priority.
I agree. Just bring people to the table. It really come to the table and talk. And that is how the program was designed. Jabee?
Yeah, I know, you could take people to the museum. I
But
think,
you can't make them drink.
Boys and Girls Club. Yeah. See you at Boys and Girls Club.
Definitely. But, like everybody else said, I think that, a lot of us know people who need to hear and have this kind of conversation. I would start with them,
Right.
and share what you know. You aren't doing people any favors by not, sharing, what you know, and opening up and having that conversation with them. So.
Yeah. I'll say, just echoing what everybody else has said, is that making a commitment to. And it may seem like something that is so simple, but it has such a powerful impact. Make a commitment that, as we're coming out of this pandemic, as people are getting vaccines, and we start getting back to some normal way of life, make a commitment that, I'm going to take somebody to lunch that doesn't look like me, that doesn't vote like I vote, that may not think the way I think, and invite them to lunch. Invite them, go an extra step and invite them to your home to have dinner. And have conversations. This is such it's a hard thing to do, but what happens is what you hear tonight is, you're not as different as I thought you were. And make the commitment to say, I'm going to start engaging on an individual level, to just start having conversation with people and get out of my bubble, get out of this everybody that I talk to sounds and looks like me, and reach out to somebody that's different and start there.
Yeah, I think the one thing we've learned over the last 25 years is that we all have a lot more in common than we do differences, and that's important. As we wrap up tonight, something important to remember is following the Oklahoma City bombing, the national media saw something in us that we may not have even seen in ourselves. They coined our community response and called it the Oklahoma Standard. We were talking about it a little bit earlier tonight. During these unprecedented times when nothing seems normal, our combined wish is this, that we never forget or that we never stop learning. Our promise, all of us collectively around this table, is that we will never stop teaching and that we will pledge to take action and do our part in creating a brighter future. Now more than ever, will you make a commitment to show up to serve, inspired by what we saw in Oklahoma City 25 years ago? We encourage all Oklahomans to look for opportunities to serve the people in their lives, at work, school, houses of worship, and in our communities. Rise up to honor on April 19th, just a little over a month away. Make plans to visit the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum and Tulsa's Greenwood Rising when it opens on January 2nd. You can learn more about that at tulsa2021.org. And step up to be kind. It's the little things we do on a daily basis that can make the lives of those around us so much better. It shouldn't take a tragedy to unite us and remind us to be kind. Let's work to unite like we have seen when our nation is in trouble. And on these very sacred grounds, let's work to find common ground. Thank you guys for joining us tonight, and thank you guys for being with us. We hope you'll join us on Better Conversations. The next one is next Tuesday evening on March 30th from 7 to 8. You can go to memorialmuseum.com and learn more about that. And then join us Friday, April 9th for a special noon Better Conversations with NPR's Krista Tippett, who we patterned Better Conversations around more than a year ago. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a good evening.